Welcome to the Times of Israel's daily briefing. Today is Wednesday, May 14th, day 586 of the war. Amanda Borschel-Dan here with our legal reporter Jeremy Sharon and reporter and editor Amy Spiro. We will discuss the warnings of impending famine in the Gaza Strip and discuss how the data was collected and how it compares to previous reports also warning of impending famine. Jeremy will also tell us about the Attorney General's instructions to the IDF to send conscription notes to all eligible Ultra-Orthodox men. Amy is here just back from Berlin, where she was with President Isaac Herzog, and she'll discuss this trip of 60 years of ties with Germany. And ahead of the second semifinal in the Eurovision Song Contest, we will discuss all things Yuval Raphael and political at the Eurovision. All this and much more when we're back. The IDF has released footage of showing the aftermath of strikes on the hospital, the European hospital in southern Gaza. This is a strike that the IDF claims was targeting the Hamas leader, Mohammed Sinwar, the brother of Yahya Sinwar. The video purports to show a tunnel that was used as Hamas operatives' headquarters under this hospital. It is as of yet unclear as to whether Mohammed Sinwar was in fact killed in this targeted strike. The Hamas-run health ministry has reported 16 dead and over 70 wounded in the strike. These numbers, of course, cannot be verified, and they come from the terrorist organization. This attack on a hospital compound comes as the buzz in international press is over impending famine in the Gaza Strip. There was, of course, a lengthy New York Times article yesterday in light of the Integrated Food Security Phase Classification Organization's special Snapshot briefing. They said in the briefing that, quote, the Gaza Strip is still confronted with a critical risk of famine and that the entire population is facing high levels of acute food insecurity, with 500,000 people, 1 in 5, facing starvation. So the conditions in Gaza are objectively terrible and heartbreaking. Of course, food is scarce. But Jeremy, we have heard from this particular organization in the past about warnings of impending famine, and this was over a year ago. So how is their data being collected and how reliable are these reports?
Right. So as you said, we should acknowledge at the beginning that there is obviously, terrible suffering in Gaza from the civilian population. That includes difficulties accessing food. But yes, it is also true to say that the projections of the IPC have in the past not materialized, and particularly their most dire warnings that famine is about to break out. So, for instance, in March 2024, the IPC projected that there would be a famine in Gaza between March and I think it was July that year. And that never materialized. And what happened is that in June, the IPC came out with a reviewed analysis saying its worst case scenarios hadn't come to fruition, things, and that and as a result there was no famine. So now on Monday, the IPC issued a new study saying that it predicted famine would break out in Gaza between now and September. One of the issues which we have with the IPC reports is that the sources of data are not clear, and their methods of collecting that data have not been made clear. And the Israeli government, the foreign ministry, the agency in the defense ministry which distributes aid in Gaza, and also Israeli public nutrition experts have all pointed out that there's a problem with the transparency of these reports, in that we don't know where the data is coming from. And even the IPC itself said yesterday in its report that the strength of the evidence provided for its famine projections was medium. So I think there's definitely an issue with the transparency of the reports and how the data is being collected, bearing in mind that Gaza is amid a terrible war and it's controlled by a terrorist organization which is not in any way an honest actor. So that's an issue with the data.
Jeremy, while it's true that no aid has been going into the Strip for the past several weeks, at least up to 2 months, much aid did enter the Gaza Strip and it just was not distributed properly. Or Hamas, of course, is accused of looting this aid and then selling it for its gain to basically fund its operations, selling it on the black market. And according to COGAT, which is the IDF wing that deals with the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, over 25,000 trucks bearing humanitarian aid entered the Gaza Strip between January 19th and March 2nd. This is prior to the blockade, obviously, carrying some 448,000 tons of aid, 339,000 tons of which was food. So this is almost 340,000 tons of food that did enter the Gaza Strip. And according to reports that we're hearing from the IDF and elsewhere, this should be enough food inside the Strip, barring any kind of looting or basically problems with distribution. So what are you hearing about this, Jeremy?
So that is one of the claims which Israel has made, is that Hamas confiscates at least a good portion of this aid. There's allegations that it takes the aid and stores it in order to sell it back to Gazans. That helps them increase their revenue streams, and obviously it makes them, it strengthens their government, their position as the ruling authority. What's also interesting is that according to the World Food Programme, which is a UN agency, they said that there's 120,000 tons of food aid waiting to come into Gaza, which would feed the Gaza a million people for 4 months. Now, if you take that calculation and you look at the 340,000 tons which entered Gaza between January and the beginning of March this year, in theory, that should be enough for 6 months. So if you count forward from January, that would take you to around mid-July, and we're only really at the beginning of May. So it does seem questions have been raised by the Israelis and by others about where is all this food aid gone? How come all of a sudden this huge amount of food has come in, and we're in May and already it's been exhausted. So that is another claim of the Israelis. And I should also point out that COGAT, as you mentioned, the Defense Ministry's agency for distributing aid, it said that the UN has actually undercounted a lot of the aid that went in, almost by almost 2/3. So what does that mean? The IPC is actually a UN affiliated agency, and COGAT said that IPC relies on UN data for making its famine projections. So if the IPC is relying on an undercount of the aid by some 2/3, then that might account for its concerns about impending famine.
I mean, the fact is, again, we stress the facts on the ground are such that people are hungry, people are really insecure about food, to put it mildly, and they need to be getting this aid. But of course, Israel and the US have been working together to create an alternative method, which could be implemented if the war does ramp up at the end of this week. But the food programs themselves are objecting to this method, which is very, very confusing to me.
Yeah, that's true. They have said that the various programs or plans put forward by Israel are not implementable and would put their people at risk, and would be very difficult to carry out on the ground.
All right, Jeremy, we're going to turn to another topic that you've been following, and that is, of course, the Attorney General Gali Bahar Rav Miara, who yesterday ordered the military to begin sending conscription orders to all draft age members of the ultra-Orthodox community at the start of the next recruitment cycle in July. The Army recruits generally for a period in August. They call it also in March, and there are various other types of recruitment, but a major one begins in July. And this comes after the government essentially has not been able to pass any kind of legislation following the Supreme Court's order, which was, I believe, in April of this year. Is that what's happening, Jeremy?
Well, what happened was in April, the Supreme Court ordered the government to explain why it has failed to implement its ruling from last year, or June 2024, when it said that there's no longer, when it basically said that the ultra-Orthodox yeshiva students have to be drafted. So, there was follow-up petitions demanding to understand why, after nearly a year, several hundred ultra-Orthodox yeshiva students have been drafted, and not several thousand, as the court requested. So, the Attorney General met with military officials earlier this week, and within those discussions, she pointed out that the fact that you've had some, I think, 19,000 ultra-Orthodox yeshiva students who previously had blanket exemptions, who have now received drafting orders since July 2024, and out of those, 319 have actually enlisted out of 19,000. So, basically, the Attorney General's concern is this is basically a mass contempt of court in the fact that there has been very little effort. The draft orders have been sent out, but it has had very little impact. And she's also concerned about the enforcement measures being taken to implement these draft orders, to have these people come to the enlistment of IDF enlistment offices and draft. So within the context of that meeting with these military officials, senior military officials, she said that now it's really the time to begin really ramping up the number of enlistment orders to be sent out. Even though 19,000 has already been sent out, that is a lot. There is an estimated 70,000 ultra-Orthodox men of military age who were previously exempt because they were studying in yeshiva, who, there's no longer a legal framework for those exemptions. So she basically said that the default position of the military should now be to basically send out all these remaining draft orders because the response rate has been so low. She also wanted to increase enforcement measures. And she also said that the period of time from sending out the draft order and taking the enforcement measures, she recommended to the military that they begin to look at reducing that time, because it can take up to, in normal circumstances, it can take up between 6 to 12 months to start implementing, travel bans and other kind of enforcement measures. And she said that in light of the situation, the desperate need of the army for manpower, she recommended that the military start looking at reducing that enforcement period.
The real question for me, it's fine. She's making all these statements. So many people are making statements. We're hearing statements from everyone about this issue. How much weight does her order carry? Is this now actually an order? Will it actually start taking place, or is it just another recommendation, just another statement?
Yeah, it's not really an order. I don't think the Attorney General exactly has the authority to order a government agency to do anything. She interprets the law and court rulings for the government. And what she's saying is that following the ruling in last year that there's no legal framework for ultra-Orthodox exemptions from military service, following the provisional order in April demanding that the government explain why it hasn't called up enough, or why enough Haredi yeshiva students have enlisted, she's saying the law, in my interpretation of the law, is that you now need to ramp up these measures in order to come into compliance with the court. But no, she can't. She doesn't really have the authority to order, that these be carried out. Although it does appear that the IDF chief of staff is now expediting those draft orders for those eligible men, and it looks like more draft orders are going to be sent out in the coming weeks. And there has been some small level of enforcement. A few dozen people who have been determined to be now draft evaders for having failed to show up to enlistment offices were arrested in the last few days. So there is a small amount of progress on that level. Having said that, really the only way to actually have this implemented is for the government to step in and start actually taking action. And because that is such a political headache for the prime minister, the ultra-Orthodox parties have essentially threatened that if there's mass arrests of ultra-Orthodox yeshiva students, they're going to quit the government. And anyway, they've said if they don't pass a law, reinstating these blanket exemptions by July, they'll also quit the government. So it's not Netanyahu's interest is to keep his coalition alive, and this is a supreme headache for him, and he does not want to. His interest is not to issue the draft orders. So until that interest changes, nothing really will change on the ground.
I think headache is great British understatement. Jeremy, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Amanda.
We'll go to a short break.
Israel Bonds, the heartbeat of solidarity, the powerhouse of support. When the Israeli-Hamas war hit, Israel Bonds stood tall, proving we're more than just an investment, we're a lifeline. Israel Bonds pledges to ensure Israel thrives and flourishes. Investing in Israel Bonds isn't just a financial move, it's a declaration for resilience, strength, and a better future for Israel. Join us and let solidarity echo through generations.
And we're back. This is Amanda Borschel-Dan here with our reporter Amy Spiro, just back from Berlin, where she took part of the delegation of President Isaac Herzog in a trip marking 60 years of ties between Israel and Germany. Amy, what would you say were the highlights of this trip to Berlin?
It was a very brief trip. We were really on the ground, just very slightly over 24 hours. So it was a real whirlwind. I think diplomatically, Herzog actually became the first world leader to meet with the new Chancellor, Friedrich Merz, who was only sworn in last week. He pulled up outside and we could actually hear the Chancellor say, "You're my first," to Herzog as he walked in. So they had, a one-on-one conversation. Outside of that, it was a very largely ceremonial trip, right? He was greeted with this big royal military welcome at the presidential palace, met with Frank-Walter Steinmeier. The two of them have been friends for decades. I mean, they've known each other many times. Steinmeier, who's in Israel now, who essentially came back with Herzog, has been to Israel like 24 times. Obviously, we do still hear some criticism from Germany, but it's not a stretch to say that Berlin is probably Israel's strongest defender in Europe at this point. Is certainly, the strongest voice for Israel's defense right now. So on that aspect, and obviously it's a huge player in the EU and in Europe. So in that aspect, it's a very important relationship for Israel.
Okay, we're going to switch tacks and now talk about the Eurovision. Last night was the first semifinal of the Eurovision. Israel did not participate in that semifinal, and unfortunately, one of our best friends in the Eurovision was kicked out. I'm talking about Azerbaijan. But we are looking ahead to participate in the next semifinal on Thursday night and potentially, hopefully, make it to the finals on Saturday night. Our candidate is Yuval Raphael, whom Amy interviewed a few weeks ago. She is a Nova Festival survivor who survived by hiding under a pile of corpses in a bunker for hours until the father of somebody else in the bunker was able to rescue them. Amy, when you spoke with Yuval, some of the quotes that she gave were just astounding to me. She is not a professional musician, but she seems incredibly calm and collected and really ready for all the booze that potentially she'll experience on stage tomorrow night. What was your impression of her?
Yeah, musically, she's very untested. She really hasn't, until she went to audition for Kochav Haba, which is the Israeli TV show that picks Eurovision. She hadn't sung in front of more than like 20 people ever in her life. So this is a real big ramp up, and hopefully musically she will stand up to the test. We'll see that tomorrow night because we haven't heard her sing live really, certainly not this song. yeah, it was very clear, that she came to the interview with me and all the other media that she spoke with that day, very prepared, very trained in order what to say, both in terms of, how she's presenting herself and the fact that she's ready to do this, and also in terms of, how careful she has to be now that she is on this stage, because the Eurovision has made it very clear that they don't want the contestants, and Israel obviously is under more scrutiny than anyone else, to talk about politics, to bring anything into it. And for her, that includes really connecting her experience at Nova and on October 7th with, the song in any way, because obviously, officially, the song is not about anything to do with that. So certainly she's very poised. She did, for months, before she tried out for, the TV show, she was actually traveling around the world talking about her experience. So she does have a lot of experience in terms of, being this sort of ambassador for Israel. She spoke in front of the UN Human Rights Council. She spoke in front of a number of organizations about her story. So she is used to that level of spotlight.
Right. She's very smooth in her presentation, very poised, I would say. Of course, we're hearing more and more that Aidan Golan, last year's candidate, was affected by the boos in the audience, and Aidan seemed a bit more tested on stage than Yuval is, who I believe just hit the stage for the first time during this reality TV program to become the candidate for the Eurovision. So that could rattle anyone, obviously. And there's a lot of politics involved. Right now, as I understand it, to make it to the final, she has to prove herself to the general public. But the next level is with these professional juries who honestly could be voting very politically, though of course they're not supposed to. What do you think her chances are, assuming she does spectacularly in her performances? What do you think Yuval's chances are just because of the political situation?
Yeah, what we saw last year was that Eden, right, did very well in the popular vote. I think we know that that was, because of this pro-Israel rally, that this activism, people were voting who wouldn't necessarily vote in a Eurovision, and that definitely gave her a big boost. And then, she did very differently in the juries. We can't sit here and say this jury, voted politically and this jury didn't vote politically. Israel last year gave all of its jury points to Luxembourg. Luxembourg was represented by an Israeli singer. Let's not pretend that that was a coincidence. I think it's not. Now that Israel can't give its votes to Azerbaijan, right, because it didn't make it to the final, I'm not sure what we're going to do, because again, let's not pretend that there's no politics involved in that decision. Also for the EBU itself, I mean, the European Broadcasting Union, which organizes the contest, an Israel win, and by the way, for Israel itself, an Israel win would be a huge headache. The EBU would almost certainly turn around and say, you can't host this contest next year, you're at war. When Ukraine won in 2022, which again, I think most people agree was a largely political decision, when Ukraine won in 2022, the EBU did not allow them to host it the next year, and it was in the UK instead. So politics are certainly going to come to play in it. I think when it comes to Israel, fair or not, I don't think any of the votes are necessarily going to be about the song. I don't know if that's in our favor or not. As we said, Yuval is very untested. We've heard sort of like mixed reviews from her rehearsals, so we don't know exactly what we're going to see on stage. But we can just wait and see what happens. And those of you listening who are able to vote can cast their votes.
Right. Israelis cannot vote for Yuval. Only people from outside the candidate's country can vote for the specific person. And Amy, I just wonder, do you have any favorites this year going into the next semifinal and the final?
Are you asking me to answer that musically or politically?
It's all about taste. I mean, the Eurovision is such a grab bag of taste. You can have, of course, 80s pop. You can have heavy metal. You can have everything at the Eurovision, and even just really nothing. And that can be one of the candidates as well. So I don't know. Do you have any favorites moving into it?
Musically, politically, this is definitely, going to get me in hot water. But musically, I actually really like the song from Ireland, although she is Norwegian. But that's Eurovision for you. So I think that's a fun song. Ireland, obviously, sort of one of our biggest detractors. I don't think a lot of votes from Israel will be going to Ireland. The song from Sweden is the heavy favorite. It is a fun song. By the way, they're Finnish. The three of them are from Finland. So a lot of mixing going on. That's a fun song. They're the ones that are just, they stick in your head for maybe bad reasons, right? We saw Estonia move on. They have this song called Espresso Macchiato, which is very strange. And by the way, speaking of political, I think I'm not the first person to point out he appears to be dressed as Donald Trump and maybe doing some movements that could be attributed to Donald Trump. Australia, which we know is not in Europe, has a very questionable song that I maybe think children should leave the room for, called Milkshake Man. You know, there's a lot going on. So there's something for everyone, I would say. And there's no way to watch it without hating some of the songs, because if you like certain genres, the other ones may be quite jarring to hear.
Okay, so those who are wanting to support Yuval Raphael can vote outside of Israel, right? Can vote on Thursday night to help her move along to the finals, and the final is Saturday night. So, Amy, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Times of Israel's Daily Briefing. Please check out another installment tomorrow. This episode was produced by the Podwaves and video edited by Thomas Gersh. If you have any questions or comments about this or any other episode, please drop us an email to podcast@timesofisrael.com. Until tomorrow, shalom.